Welcome back. We're still reading Chapter 2 of Joseph Campbell's book on primitive mythology. Chapter 2 is entitled The Imprints of Experience, and today I'm going to start Section 5 in Chapter 2 called The System of Sentiments of the Local Group. This is a pretty long section, so it's going to be a few recordings to get through this. All right, the transformation of the child into the adult, which is achieved in higher societies through years of education, is accomplished on the primitive level more briefly and abruptly by means of the puberty rites that for many tribes are the most important ceremonials of their religious calendar. When a Central Australian Aranda youngster is between 10 and 12 years old, for example, he and the other members of his age group are taken by the men of the village and tossed several times into the air, while the women, dancing around the company, wave their arms and shout. Each boy is painted on his chest and back with simple designs by a man related to the social group from which his wife must come. And as they paint the patterns, the men sing, "May he reach to the stomach of the sky. May he grow up to the stomach of the sky. May he go right into the stomach of the sky." The boy is told that he now has upon him the mark of the particular mythological ancestor of whom he is the living counterpart. For it is thought that the children born to women are the reappearances of beings who lived in the mythological age, in the so-called dream time, or Alteringa. The boys are told that from now on they will not play or camp with the women and girls, but with the men. They will not go with the women to grub for roots and hunt such small game as rats and lizards, but will join the men and hunt the kangaroo. In this simple rite, it is apparent that the image of birth has been transferred from the mother to the sky, and that the concept of the ego has been expanded simultaneously beyond the biography of the physical individual. A woman gave birth to the boy's temporal body, but the men will now bring him to the spiritual birth. They will continue and consummate his post-uterine gestation, the long process of his growth to a fully human maturity, refashioning his body and his mind as well, joining him to his eternal portion beyond time. Furthermore, in the ceremonials that he will presently observe, the tasks proper to his manhood will in every detail be linked to mythological fantasies of a time-transcending order, so that not only himself but his whole world and his whole way of life within it will be joined inseparably through myths and rites to the field of the spirit. Henceforth, all life on earth is to be recognized as a projection on the plane of temporal event of forms. Henceforth, all life on earth is to be recognized as a projection on the plane of temporal event of forms, objects, and personalities forever present in the permanent nowhere, no when of the mythological age, the Alteringa dream time, when all was magical, as it is in dream, the realm that is seen again in dream and shown forth in the rites. The boy is himself a mythological eternal being who has become incarnate. His fellows, too, are the manifestations of eternal forms. Likewise the kangaroos that he will soon be hunting, and the well-known desert reaches, where the magical mystery play of the hunt will be enacted in the serious game of life. The mystery play of the death and reappearance of the kangaroo, who is to give his flesh as a willing victim to be the food of men. No child, no woman, is aware of the real marvel of this dual mystery, wherein the timeless and the temporal are the same. This secret dimension of the world is the revelation of the men's rights, through which the mind grows to knowledge, and after beholding which one is far above the plane of the mental system of the child. It is a marvel, a source of wonder, well worth the pain and fright of a second birth. And meanwhile, throughout the physical as well as psychological ordeal of transformation, in compensation for the earthly mother lost, the boy's pliant mind and will are to be directed forward to the image of his manhood with an earthly wife. It is clear what is happening. The imprints irreversibly established in infancy as energy-releasing signs are being reorganized, and through an extremely vivid, increasingly frightening, and unforgettable series of controlled experiences are in the end to be so recomposed that the boy's course will be directed forward into manhood. Not to any merely open, uncommitted manhood, but specifically to a certain style of thought and feeling, impulse and action, comporting with the requirements of the local group. For it is at this point in his development that the mores, ideology, and motivations of the local system of life are to be assimilated into his psyche, fused with his spiritual substance, and thus made his own, as he has made theirs. As already remarked in the words of Radcliffe Brown, a society depends for its existence on the presence in the minds of its members of a certain system of sentiments by which the conduct of the individual is regulated in conformity with the needs of the society. And further, the sentiments in question are not innate, but are developed in the individual by the action of the society upon him. It is in the rites of initiation that these sentiments of the local system are established through a forced fusion with the primary system of the mentality of childhood, which, as we have seen, is universal, or practically universal, to the human race. The system of sentiments of the local group, however, has been constellated not primarily or even secondarily to gratify the crude wishes of the growing adolescent for sensual pleasure and manly power, but rather in the general interest of a group having certain specific local problems and limitations. The crude energies of the young human animal are to be cowed, broken, recoordinated to a larger format, and thus at once domesticated and amplified. Hence, although the rites certainly have a psychological function and must be interpreted in terms of the general psychology of the human species, each local system itself has a long history behind it of a particular sort of social experience and cannot be explained in general psychological terms. It has been closely adjusted to specific geographically determined conditions of existence, and comprehends furthermore certain archaic notions of cosmology that have been derived from millenniums of meditation on the recognized natural order of the living world. From culture to culture, the sign symbols presented in the rites of initiation differ considerably, and they have to be studied consequently from a historical as well as a psychological point of view. It must be recognized that either view alone is an oversimplification. No functioning mythological system can be explained in terms of the universal images of which it is constituted. These images are developed largely from such infantile imprints as those that we have just reviewed and constitute merely the raw material of myth. They carry the energies of the psyche into the mythological context and weld them to the historical task of the society, where the symbols function not in the way of a regressive recall of the spirit to the joys and sorrows, desires and terrors of little Oedipus, or of the earlier Bambino, but rather as releasers and directors of the energies into the field of adult experience and performance.
Mythology, that is to say, is progressive, not regressive, and the rites themselves, through which the new sign symbols are impressed on the minds of the growing young in such a way as to recondition the entire system of their innate releasing mechanisms, constitute one of the most interesting and crucial foci of our subject. For it is precisely here that we confront directly the problem of the meeting of the general and the particular, of the elementary and the ethnic, in the field of myth. The initiation rite is the cauldron of their fusion. And should the fusion not take place? If it should happen, in the case of any particular individual, that the impress of the socially enforced reorganization of the infantile imagery should fail of its proper effect, that particular individual's personal system of references and consequently of sentiments would remain essentially infantile, and therefore aberrant, isolating, shameful, and frightening, so that the sort of disorientation known so well to the psychoanalytic couches of our contemporary literarily instead of so that the sort of disorientation known so well to the psychoanalytic couches of our contemporary literally instead of mythologically and ritually educated civilization would inevitably result. In the traumatic experience of his second birth, the individual would have suffered an accident precisely comparable to a misbirth or physical accident in the first, in which case, of course, a regressive interpretation of his peculiar mode of experiencing the imagery of local myth would be in order. However, for the psychoanalyst, then, to make use of the fantasies of that regressive case as a key to the scientific understanding of the progressively functioning mythology and ceremonialism of the social group in question would be about as appropriate as to mistake a pancake for a souffle. It is possible that the failure of mythology and ritual to function effectively in our civilization may account for the high incidence among us of the malaise that has led to the characterization of our time as the age of anxiety. It may be that it is only among our poets and artists, journalists and PhD, that the impress of our socially framed system of sentiments has failed of effect, so that this notion of the prevalence of anxiety is an invention peculiar to them, based rather on their own sophisticated pathology than on the more naive state of health of the majority of their fellows. But in either case, it would certainly seem that when an essentially cerebral emphasis preponderates in the schooling of the young, it does, as it does in our highly literate society, an alarming incidence of serious failure is to be expected in the difficult passage of the critical threshold from the system of sentiments proper to infancy to that of the responsibilities of the hour, and that, consequently, any attempt to interpret the symbolism of archaic man on the basis of contemporary thought and feeling must be extremely dangerous. In following the further progress of the puberty rites and ordeals of the Central Australian Aranda, therefore, it will be well to leave the cliches of modern psychology to one side and focus rather on the particular character and tasks of the local desert scene, where the temperature at noon is frequently as high as 140 degrees Fahrenheit, where the normal social unit is a little cluster of intimately known relatives and companions, all of whom, both male and female, are stark naked, where there is no written tradition through which the corpus of tribal knowledge, style of spiritual life, and techniques of subsistence can be communicated, and where the chief object of the hunt is the bounding kangaroo. So we'll stop there and pick up with the second part of section 5 in the next video. Thank you for joining me, and enjoy your day.